Welcome to our first Charity Pulse of 2025, our bi-weekly charity podcast. My name is Charles Mosquito, Charity Director at Quilter Cheviot Investment Management. I'm delighted to be joined by my regular musketeers, Catherine Ross-John-G, leading charity legal beagle at Shakespeare Martineau, and James Saunders, charity partner at leading accountancy and audit firm Moore Kingston Smith. Together, we explore the latest pressing issues to give you insight into the issues affecting the not-for-profit and voluntary sector. Don't forget, you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, and our various websites. I want to put out this in the new year a plea. Do please send us questions, as we would love to hear from you. Now, I thought we were going to have a fairly quiet beginning to the year. I had been looking at the New Year's Honours list, hoping to see you both featured in it. Sadly, you weren't, but I will live in expectation. But James, you very kindly sent us an interesting article from Business and Accountancy Daily, which I have to say I didn't check what the readership was, where they had a headline about charity and trustees lose 420,000 appeal. And this was to do with Mr. Harvey, who was a CBE, no less, and his three daughters. Do you want to explain the background to this particular issue? Because I think this follows on from what we were discussing pre-Christmas.
Yeah, it does rather, and it links in with this gift aid, HMRC, gift aid. I don't think it's a scam. I think it's probably HMRC would say it was a mistake in gift aid applications. But yeah, basically this Mr. Harvey was is a retired wealthy businessman and a business owner. And he set up a charity. It seems to, I think, probably support the logistics industry, which is where he worked. And the HMRC report seems to indicate that the business, Mr. Harvey's business, gave repaid money to Mr. Harvey, and he then paid money into the charity, which then lent the money back to the business. And all the time, the individual and the charity were claiming gift aid relief on the transactions, when in the end the money it was pretty circular and the money ended up in the business. Now, HMRC started, I think, this process, and this is another one that took several years to work through, but they started the investigation by claiming, or under the presumption, that the donations were tainted, which of course means that they were effectively illegal, and Mr. Harvey had instigated the transactions to personally benefit. And the personal benefit here is that the business performed better, in effect, benefited. The business was owned by this individual, and he therefore was, better off because the business performed better and was able to presumably pay him more money in whichever form that went. So, and the gift aid was effectively the gift aid from HMRC was claimed and inappropriately. So HMRC started with this presumption that the donations were tainted. They eventually, I think, reined back on that and got to the conclusion that the lesser fault, if you like, of the donations weren't considered to qualify for gift aid relief was the most appropriate conclusion. And this particular case we're talking about was a tribunal to see whether Mr. Harvey and the charity could appeal against HMRC's decision. That the tribunal rejected the appeal, so HMRC was seen to be correct, and gift aid shouldn't have been claimed by either Mr. Harvey or the charity. So that really is kind of the slightly crude potted history on it. But it's another one of these HMRC cases where they've really honed down on the misuse of gift aid, if you like. Some quite large, chunky amounts of money there. It's quite technical. Now I had to read through quite a very long element of the case to really understand what was going on. One other point that sprung out was that the charity trustees were Mr. Harvey and his three daughters, which Charles, you referred to earlier. So you've got to wonder about the whole question of governance. And Catherine that's one area where we've talked about this before. Do you have the right governance in place, the right trustees, the right independence, the right advice? And in this case, it's a very grey area. I think the charity and Mr. Harvey had professional advisors in place. I think it's come down to a bit of a sharp practice, let's say.
Yeah, I did wonder about who was advising on this. I mean, it started off sounding like a fairy tale. I thought Mr. Harvey and his three daughters, and they live in a castle. But then I was reading it, and the charity no longer exists, so I couldn't see what its objects were. To see how on earth did anybody think we can put money into the charity from the business, and then the charity gives the money back out the other end, back to the business again. And I advise a lot on new charities registering, grant making foundations, where it's a family trust often, where they do want to have family members as trustees. And the Charity Commission will argue there is a conflict potentially, which I don't tend to see, where those family members want to give the money out to other charities in the UK. Therefore, where is the conflict to them? But here, there was a clear conflict. I mean, I wouldn't envy the three daughters trying to stand up to their dad and say, honestly, is this right? Is this what we're meant to be doing? I thought the whole thing just seemed absolutely contrived. But I find it also, it's cases like this make it so much harder for others to set up a genuine charitable foundation, because everybody is then cautious about, oh, well, remember this case and let's have a look and make sure that there isn't this untoward circular, transfer of money. So I just thought it seemed very obvious to me, but it was obviously much more technical than that, I think, in the ins and outs of it.
Yeah, I mean, reading the tribunal notes, what you described there about, would the daughters stand up to the father? There was very much reading between the lines with the interviews with the daughters. Dad just took care of everything. Dad was making the decisions. We trusted him that he would. So that the real key bit here, right, is they fell foul of the Income Tax Act 2007, Section 4167A. And there's 6 conditions that gift aid claims have to meet to be able to be a gift. And condition F is that there are no benefits associated with the gift, and specifically no benefits, for the donor. And clearly the conclusion in the end here was that Mr. Harvey himself benefited because his business improved, because was better off because of the donation. Yeah. That's where they've got into trouble. And you're right, Catherine. I hear this a lot actually. With there are links between charities and businesses, and what's wrong with someone who has a charitable foundation and experience in investment, advising on investments. Was nothing wrong with that, as long as they don't personally benefit from anything, and also by extension from further transactions, which is what's happened here.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that, okay, fine, there was the article itself wasn't particularly well written. You've done quite a lot of investigation, and the focus is on which part of the law that has been breached or regulations. But the complexity here, it just seems to me you cannot give money to a charity and then charity to lend it back to your own company. I mean, it just why would you do that? If you're setting up a charity, it's there for a particular purpose. So what was that purpose? The fact we can't see it now. I just find it. And the other thing,
Charles, just on that point, there is one single mitigating factor here, which is the trustees have made this decision in effect to give the money to to lend the money back to the business. The charity was making interest money, interest was benefiting. So yeah. There is fundamentally, that's one element. I'm not saying it solves problems, but the charity was better off for the transaction.
Okay, but I'm being deeply cynical here, and I suspect not as cynical as I'm saying I am being. But they were only doing it because they thought they could give the money to the charity, which would have effectively, because of the gift aid, and then lend it back into the business, even if they're paying interest on it. They're actually at a lower rate to what it. I mean, the whole thing is, and the other thing, I don't know whether they were named, but whoever the advisors were, if they have given this advice, they should be named and shamed, because
they were named. Yeah, they were named.
Yeah. They were.
And it's so funny because the case, I mean, it draws you in. It was all to do with the business wanted a new crane. Yeah. And I just feel like singing The Farmer Wants a Wife. So I think the business wants a crane. And so you give the money to the charity lends it back, and, and so it goes on.
Yeah. I mean, fundamentally, you're absolutely right, Charles. You take the gift aid benefit out of this, and probably the transaction doesn't happen. So yeah, it's happening because they have seen, oh, we could have some gift aid out of this. Brilliant.
So they should definitely be named and shamed on that. Moving on about another thing that, James, you've picked up, isn't this, around OMAS, which is this organization that was effectively came out of the US, that was set up in the UK in 2020, looking to raise money for charities, doing, I suppose you're probably best to explain of how, on a prize draw. So
this is Omaze, which has been doing big things in America for a few years, and now has a UK version as well. And you might have seen the adverts on the TV. Win this house and all the costs going with it, win this car and all this sort of thing. I mean, you can't get away from the fact it is raising big money for charities. It's partnering at the moment with the British Heart Foundation. It's been with GOSH and Teenage Cancer Trust and Dogs Trust. It stemmed from, as you said, Charles, a US organization, Omaze in the US. Now, interestingly, the US version is paused/closed at the moment because of problems with regulations, apparently. I'm not quite sure what more we know about that, but yeah, regulatory problems in the US, which have shut that down. So now it's going on in the UK. There is a technicality here again, in that, and this is where it's being questioned at the moment, it is a prize draw as distinct from a lottery. And that's a big difference there, because a prize draw is regulated by no disrespect due to the fundraising regulator, but compared to the more onerous regulators, it's a relatively light touch review from the fundraising regulator, which doesn't look at gambling, as opposed to lotteries, which are regulated by the Gambling Commission and therefore come under the remit of the much more onerous Gambling Commission regulation. So there is a big difference. And the technicalities around a prize draw versus lottery. Prize draw, you have to have some way of having a free entry, basically, which in most cases now is you don't have to send us a text message or ring up or pay for an entry. You can send us a postal entry. Now, actually, as it turns out, with the cost of a first class or second class stamp these days, I think they've worked out that the cost of sending a letter is more expensive than buying an entry. But in theory, there's a free route of entry into these prize draws. That's why it's a prize draw rather than the Gambling Commission. There's no accounts at Companies House that show full years of operations yet. It's been in existence for 3 years, I think. The last set of accounts filed at December 22. It's extended its December 23 filing deadline. So they're not there yet. The whole thing to me at the moment is quite murky, and the reason we talk about it now is we are getting questions from people. How reliable is it? How steady is it? How reputable is it? They are, as I say, partnering with at the moment the British Heart Foundation, I think, who are full of praise for them. When all said and done, it's great money being raised for charity, but it is a for-profit organisation. There's no clarity at all or transparency on how much they make, how much they're earning at the moment, as far as I can see. So, yeah, it's all a bit of a murky pond, really.
I think they said, didn't they, that they took 20% to pay for administering the organisation. From the figures that you gave us, it was what they've raised over about 11.2 million. Yeah. So that they've effectively taken 2.3 on the basis of its 20%. Catherine,
there's plenty of stuff on their website about what the single line answers, frequently asked questions. How much does Omaze raise? Well, we raise this much. How much is it? But there's no evidence for it. It's all just statements on a website. You need evidence for this sort of stuff, don't you, when it's this serious?
Yeah, it's just so showy. It's just so American, I find. But the number of clients who've mentioned it to me saying, how on earth can this be right, proper, appropriate? Is it right for a charity to essentially be giving that sort of sprinkling of fairy dust that makes this look like a charitable endeavor rather than something else? And I just find it so, we're always told, aren't we? If it looks too good to be true, it probably is. And here you get the house, the furnishings, a car, money, it seems peculiar. I think it just seems uncomfortable. I have a number of clients who just think ethically they wouldn't, if they were given that choice, or they say this, but I think if someone was offering you 2 million, I don't know if they would say no, but they would say, we wouldn't want to be associated with it. We don't like the smell test of this.
And Catherine, again, playing devil's advocate, of course, the National Lottery is run by a for-profit company. It claims it gives money to charity. The National Lottery has had its critics as well about quite how much goes where, and how much of it is smoke and mirrors. But overall, I think it's fair to say the National Lottery, the write-up when the National Lottery comes up is, it's done a lot. The primary thing is it's done a lot of good work for charity, raised a lot of money. This one, I accept what you say about it's just a bit more tacky, isn't it?
It's a bit much. I mean, I want the latest house. I would put that out there, even though it's tacky. I would take it. I want it. I love it. But yeah, it is just not quite right.
And there are also other adverts on the TV at the moment for purely, nothing to do with charity prize draws, which it's very difficult to see them apart, frankly.
Yeah.
Omaze versus the other ones that we won't talk about, but they're the same thing. They're massive prizes, easy to enter. Do it now. There's time limits. You've only got the whole process is the same thing, which associates it with a pretty seedy approach.
So to me, I agree with Catherine. If I was a trustee looking at it, if somebody said 2 million, I suppose that would make me pause for thought. But there is something that makes me slightly uncomfortable about what they're doing, and whether that's aligned with the values of most organisations. The bit that really always worries me is where you've got an organisation that is set up, that is using the current rules for its own benefit, i.e., it's making sure that it isn't under the Gambling Commission, and it where it should definitely be sitting there. The fundraising regulator, to be fair to them, they've said this is what we regulate, and we are not there to cover the other bits of it. So they will focus on that bit, and they will have to comply with. But this is blatantly should fall under the Gambling Commission and should be monitored by them. I mean, you go back to the National Lottery and you can have views about gambling, etc., and the impacts of that. But at least it is properly regulated, it is monitored, and at least you have some form of transparency, and it has oversight from Parliament and government.
You also can't get away, Charles, from the parent model, if you like. The US entity has been paused.
Well,
I mean that it is a worry.
That should give you pause for thought. And okay, fine. The British Heart Foundation may be very happy at the moment to have had 2 or 3 million from things, and I'm sure they are. But this turns into a situation that they didn't expect, and of course it's their reputation that will be on the line. Everybody will have forgotten who Omaze is. They won't have even known who they were. So it'll be the British Heart Foundation that's reputation will be at risk on this. So I hope they have done, I'm sure they will have done, sufficient research into the validity of the organisation and the way that they conduct their business.
Yeah, it is that gambling element as well, isn't it, Charles? And I think they're just the pressure of it, because on the website even you've got this countdown of, so that the house that I want, it runs out in 2 days, 14 hours, 13 minutes, 52 seconds, 51, so it kind of ramps it all up, doesn't it? But yeah.
We better finish off quickly, Charles. So
I know, got to get on.
Go and buy some more tickets.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, so the other thing I spotted was that Oscar has done a report on the King's Foundation, which was previously the Prince's Foundation for the Built Environment, where they have found serious and unacceptable failures in the management of the charity, particularly in the handling of donations with a Saudi billionaire. And if you remember, this, I think, came to sort of hit the press probably 2 or 3 years ago around cash for honours. And I think that the chief executive had previously been His Royal Highness's valet. and there was obviously some issues around how much information he was giving to the trustees or keeping the trustees in the dark. And then the final thing I thought was quite interesting was about the misuse of borrowed old masters paintings. So Bernie Ecclestone's son-in-law, I think, had lent a number of old masters for Dumfries House. Catherine, I don't know if you've had a look at this.
I did. It's just bonkers. It's another world where it was saying, some of the criticism was there was a transaction between the charity to purchase a home furnishing item for a former trustee. I'm guessing their house isn't like mine. I don't know what item this would be. And, all this, why are they taking an old master's painting? There was I think it seems to me, a lie by the former chief exec about whether the charity owned that painting. He said they did. They didn't. It was lent to them. They didn't have insurance in place. But when you look at the charity itself, it's about young people and activities, and you think, how on earth is any of this advancing those charitable objects? It just seemed so otherworldly, but just entirely wrong, and I think a million miles away from what that charity should have been doing.
Yeah, I just don't disagree with Catherine when she's right. It just seems all pretty tawdry, really. I mean, as you say, Catherine, the purpose of the charity is to help kids. The trustees seem to be having little benefits on the side here and there. I mean, why on earth was this going on? Just seems from a different time, really. It wouldn't have been right in that time, but this day and age, you've got to be independent, and as we said earlier, no personal benefit.
Well, and to be fair, the royal family have been very supportive of the sector and have been great at helping raise money. But of course, because of the position that they hold, they're always going to be slightly vulnerable to this. I mean, with the cash for honours, to be fair, the police did investigate and they could find no wrongdoing, I think, from memory. The other thing I thought was quite interesting is how the regulators work because they're obviously, this is dual register, or is registered both with the Charity Commission and with Oscar. I assume this investigation happened because it's Dumfries House and it's in Scotland. And I assume that they will have agreed with the Charity Commission that they would lead on the investigation. Catherine, I don't know if you've had any experience with that.
Yeah, I think that would be the case. And I suppose, the prominence of it in Scotland and how that's a compelling issue there. So they would naturally take the lead on that. But it is interesting, isn't it, to see how another regulator for a change rather than just the Charity Commission is also able to publish these reports. And, the charity has changed its name since then. So you think, probably trying to move away from this history. Yeah.
And so another thing I spotted or came into my inbox was around understanding the risks non-profit organizations faced from terrorist financing schemes. I don't know if either of you have looked at the Charity Commission's consultation.
I took a sneaky peek. That was as far as I got. It was quite intimidating, just the opening page.
Yeah. Similar. I haven't looked at it any more than that.
I have to say I did, because I've got one organisation where we do stuff abroad, and I did read all the questions. I'm not sure I could have answered the majority of them, and I'm not sure I wanted to answer or what value the answers I gave it. This to me is a very specialist area that most charities won't be getting involved with, but I can still see that people need to be aware of to avoid. And I have to say, I've had past experience of where, we've been doing stuff in difficult areas of the world where terrorists or accusations around that become quite prevalent. So what else was there on the final one was around the Royal Literary Society. Did you, both of you, see that, where we have the chair of trustees is stepping down, I think, at the end of his term? And the director is leaving over following a governance review.
Yeah, I did see it. It reminded me of the actors. I think the actors and the authors all seem to, when they have a spat, they really go to town. But similarly, I just found it all desperately sad, really, that, charitable assets are not being used for the purposes for which they were given. They've had a huge, it would look like, governance review that will be announced at the AGM next week. And all of this publicity, it's not a great look for the charity. If I was thinking, what charity should I support? Oh, I'm not sure I would pick this one now, to think, is that how the funds are spent? Is that how they organise themselves? And it just seemed too far from charitable activity and more about self-interest and self-promotion.
Yeah, it is. I think it is sad when, a reputable historical charity has its name effectively, pulled through the mud by commentary and stuff that really isn't, they looked up exactly what this charity stands for, and it's to support and encourage literary efforts and support authors, and that's what it's there for. It's not to issue and comment, and why is it getting itself entangled in commentary on matters? That's for other people to do. If you're this charity, you're there to support your beneficiaries, and they've strayed from that. And then the second element, when obviously they can't sort this out for themselves. We talked about this before with, have you got governance arrangements in place that disagreements can be managed? You can disagree agreeably, if you like, but it doesn't seem to have happened here. They've just all fallen out, and it again, it's very disappointing. But as with the King's Foundation case, the responsibility does fall with the trustees, and the trustees have got to understand that they have the duty to get these things resolved and not put their charities in this sort of position. And egos have clearly got in the way and messed this up.
Yeah, because there were allegations around censorship, wasn't there, and criticism, and it was sort of, I think there was Israel and Gaza was part of it, and then the stabbing of Salman Rushdie, all of which are, can be quite contentious issues, but you should be able to deal with them in a way that's sort of grown up, isn't it?
Yeah.
On that basis. Yeah. And then the final thing that I spotted was Keir Starmer has been greatly encouraged by the response of the Civil Society Covenant consultation. So it seems to me that the Prime Minister is continuing on the basis of wanting to have a closer working relationship with the sector, which I have to say, and a better partnership. So I have to say that is good news. Although I did see a quote from Clement Attlee, which said, a charity is a cold, grey, loveless thing. If a rich man wants to help the poor, he should pay his taxes gladly, not dole out money at a whim. And on that note, I'm going to leave that for further thought and discussion at our next Charity Pulse. So thank you, James. Thank you, Catherine. To say nothing else, we certainly live in interesting times. Thank you, everybody, for listening. We would love to hear from you. If you have any questions or want us to cover any topics, please do get in touch. Do share this leading charity podcast with your friends, families, colleagues, because according to our friend at Truth Social, this is the leading charity podcast and the only one worth listening to. And then finally, of course, don't forget you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and our various websites.